with France clearly visible. Then there's an odd textbook. Next to it is a hymn book open on the page of a hymn written by Martin Luther, of all people. And then some musical instruments, a lute and a collection of flutes. So what do we make of all this? Well, certain scholars have put forward the view, and it seems perfectly credible to me, that this mathematical book is about the process of division, and that Luther himself, as well as being a reformer, is also a divider of the church, and that the lute with its broken string is a symbol of frailty, but also it means that the hymn can't be fully realised. And so what is happening here is that there's a comment by Holbein on the religious situation specifically in England and also more broadly in Europe. But I think the key to these paintings are in two details that are not here in the centre, but they're found, first of all, in the top left-hand corner, which is the crucifix, which is barely in view, but it's making its presence felt. But secondly, and much more curious, is this form here in the foreground that you can only see when you start to walk and look from another perspective. And then you see, clearly from this angle, that it's a skull through a process known as anamorphosis, or stretching or distorting the image. And it's clear that there's this great symbol thrust across the surface of the painting that is a memento mori, a reminder of death and the frailty of human life. And I think the broader point is being made by Holbein here that, in fact, conflict obscures the truth. The truth is up there in the top left-hand corner of the painting for Holbein. Christ himself crucified on the cross. That's the redemptive hope for mankind. But I think also Holbein is making an even more interesting point with this work, and it's to do with the whole process of painting, what Holbein has devoted his life to. Because no one in European art up to this point has scrutinised the natural world as closely as Holbein and rendered it with such extraordinary care and attention and detail. And what he's managing to show us in this painting is that you can have scholarship, you can have diplomacy, you can have an expanded new culture of learning, but that you will never grasp the bigger picture, you'll never understand the world totally from one fixed viewpoint, and that you have to see the world from a number of different perspectives. And that, I think, is a very profound point.
Within 3 years of painting the ambassadors, Holbein got the position he really wanted, painter to the king, and began a series of portraits that have defined how that most familiar of English monarchs has been seen down the ages. This is the quintessential image of an overbearing and tyrannical monarch. Holbein depicts the king seemingly at face value, emphasising the small humorless eyes and mouth, the curiously flat cheeks and chin. But his authority is clear, formidable even, amplified by opulent jewellery depicted in real gold leaf, and helping to create a domineering presence, even though the work itself is small. Consequently, Henry approved of the painting, as did Thomas Cromwell, who was cleverly encouraging the use of the painter to promote the power of the monarch. An idea which was reinforced when Holbein was commissioned to paint a group portrait of the Tudor dynasty for Henry's Whitehall Palace. The picture, subsequently destroyed in the palace fire of 1698, showed Henry and his now third wife, Jane Seymour, together with his parents, Elizabeth of York and Henry VII. The image of the two Henrys, which survive in this preparatory drawing, affirms the idea of dynastic progression and increasing power from lean father to vast son. But the Queen, Jane Seymour, was to die giving birth to Henry's long-awaited heir. But the king didn't spend much time mourning. Together with the assistance of his Chancellor Cromwell, he decided to try and find a new wife, preferably one who would combine political advantage with the physical beauty that Henry sought. And so Holbein was dispatched to Europe to paint suitable candidates from which Henry could then make his matrimonial choice.
Holbein's first port of call is to Brussels to paint this young woman, Christina of Denmark, the Duchess of Milan. Now, she's the younger daughter of the King of Denmark, who's a Lutheran and who's been deposed. She's also married to the Duke of Milan, but is a widow by the age of 12. 4 years later, when she's 16, she's ready to sit for this portrait because the King of England wants to marry her. Now, Holbein gets 3 hours with her in the date in March, and he sketches her face and her hands and makes intricate studies, which is reflected in the finished oil. And when Henry sees the results, rumour has it that he falls in love. Certainly, he wants to marry her. He sees, if not a ravishing beauty, someone who's young and will give him more heirs, perhaps a healthy heir. But politically, There are machinations. She's very well connected. She's also the niece of the Emperor Charles V, who doesn't want any connection with Henry VIII. And so the wedding doesn't take place. Her response, though, is a bit more diplomatic. She says, if I had two heads, I'd happily place one at the disposal of the King of England.
Henry finally settled on marrying Anne of Cleves, but Holbein was placed in an impossible position. He was dispatched to the Rhineland with orders to produce an instant likeness of Henry's next intended, but he needed to exercise diplomacy and tact. Anne's dress seems to have fascinated Holbein more than the strangely lifeless symmetry of her features. And Henry's displeasure at finding Anne of Cleves, more, as he put it, like a flat Flanders mare when she arrived for the marriage ceremony in January 1540, cost Holbein dear in prestige. In fact, he received no further significant work from Henry. 3 years later, having completed his last portrait, that of himself, Holbein fell seriously ill and died, probably the victim of the plague which had spread through London in 1543. He was 45 years old. Holbein's influence on British painting is enormous. He made the human individual seem more real and more exposed than any artist before him, and is the father of a tradition of portraiture which continues to this day. But he also created images of a king and his court which has lived on in the popular imagination, bringing to life one of the most dramatic periods in English history.